on one of the topics which we've seen, having a lot of traction in the recent past, which is Agri-Tech. So Agri-Tech has, fundamentally two advantages. One is it's social as well, because it's truly impacting the productivity in agriculture, and therefore, good for the earth as well. But there are a lot of changes which are happening in this industry, and as we as service providers and participants and partners in various different scenarios are seeing the change and seeing multiple organizations kind of adopt technology far too extensively in agri areas, which is kind of surprising, right? You would have expected agriculture to be slightly more laid back. The intent is to just go through some amount of discussion on that in terms of the key trends that we see in this space. And there are far more trends that I'm, kind of expecting in the coming decade. And as that happens, just for us to prepare ourselves from a thought process perspective, as individuals, as organizations, as well as a country, to figure out how things would evolve over a period of time. So, the intent here is to showcase that we'll have a broad discussion for 30 minutes or so, and post that we'll take the Q&A. In the meantime, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to respond back into the Q&A section or the chat section as the case may be. Right. With that, I've got a brief presentation for you guys, and I'll just present that and take it from there. Yeah. So broadly, we've kind of divided the sections into three. What are the emergence of Agri-Tech? What are the reasons of Agri-Tech kind of coming up? What are the key 4 or 5 trends that we see and different business models that we see in the industry? And then, finally, conclusion and discussion amongst us, right? To start with, agriculture is one of the most oldest profession that humans have known, right? Agriculture, give or take, would have started 10,000 years back. So, so one of the oldest professions. It is a $2.4 trillion industry globally. And there is a huge population, nearly 1.3 billion population, of 20% of human population or more, and 58% of Indian population involved in this profession, right? Clearly, this is the backbone of the livelihood for a lot of people, right? And there is some things which is tip the demand supply equation, both in terms of providing better mapping what is the demand and what is the supply, much better, ensuring that changing consumer demands are kept at rest, but also in terms of productivity and productivity enhancements and the use of technology in the whole overall space, right? And these are key trends which we are seeing, and we'll expand on what exactly we mean here. But in the meantime, what we also see is the investments from the VC or the investment community is significantly starting to increase over a period of time in the Agri-Tech space, right? So the CAGR growth of investments is as much as 80%, and coming into the Agri-Tech space, which just goes on to show that there is far more interest coming. Now, if we take a pause, right, most of this information we are aware of, right? If we take a pause and think through, why should this be happening? And I think the answer will really come and get into the fact that agriculture is really significantly more repeat job, right? So the potential for automation and technology intervention is significantly equally high. And that is what is happening both with the AI systems and the way technology is proceeding across, right? So I'll talk about the key 4 or 5 trends which are kind of really disrupting the agri space, right? The first one, data-enabled agriculture, right? too much of data that you can collect through various channels, through IoT devices, through satellites and others. And, can it be used into meaningful sense? Well, they are being used in several scenarios, right? So how can that form and formulate various different new business models that we currently see in the market, right? The second, which is more intuitive and traditional, and can be understood much better, which is supply chain and logistics, right? The amount of wastage which happens across the supply chain in agriculture is immense, and it is also because of the fact that inherently agri products are fairly perishable and can, there's a huge amount of wastage which happens in it, right? So supply chain and logistics and the disruption associated with it. And we ourselves have seen so many 4 or 5 different cases where we've solved these problems for other organizations already, right? Automation and robotics, right? That is where increasingly the adoption of IoT and the big data analytics and others are truly playing a role across the process of farming, right? Across all the stages of farming and how that is happening. Agri processing and packaging, obviously. And finally, some of the new business models in order to enable the farmers and the agri industry overall, right? So these are the new business models, are more SaaS-based business models, which are kind of coming into being, which we've seen adoption not just in technology spaces, but also in hard capex areas, right? And given the fact that agri is a high capex area, a lot more of those kind of business models kind of coming into being, right? I'll briefly touch upon each of these kind of areas and give some examples and our role as HashedIn that we've played across this, some of these areas. And it's just interesting just to watch. And I fundamentally believe, as I said earlier, right, that agri industry truly will transform itself in the course of the decade, right? The first one, right? We've all heard about IoT and the disruption that IoT is providing for various different industrial applications as well as home-based applications, right? But what's more interesting is Internet of Cows within the agri space, right? And the reason we call that as the Internet of Cows is because it was first adopted in breeding of cows and managing cows with internet applications, or they were pinned onto the ears of the cow. Amazingly, over a period of time, what was observed was the productivity of the cow actually went up by nearly 1.8 liters per day, or nearly 7 to 8% overall in terms of the productivity of the cow on average, right? And that was one of the first adoption because cow provides the yield on a daily basis. But essentially, what were we doing, right? Through the GPS devices and the Bluetooth devices, which were kept on the ears of the cow, we could assess and evaluate how much has the cow fed, what has it done, what is the level of activity, and what is the timing of the milking and others, and how can that be maximized overall, right? Just by doing some of these basic optimization levels in the cow, it could make as much as 8% on average impact on the cows, right? And slowly the same concept is now being adopted in various different forms of farming applications, and clearly as well as precision agriculture, right? So how best can we provide the soil with the right set of ingredients, the right composition, right level of moisture? How do we ensure the temperature is better, so on and so forth, which helps the farmer or the agri product to actually enhance their productivity by 10%. Now, clearly, it's a capex intensive industry, but in various different spaces, including farming of grapes to apples, they are saying that the productivity can enhance by as much as $20 to $100 per acre of produce. The second thing, which is even more interesting, is space monitoring, right? So a lot of what's happening is geospatial application, and you can observe, way back from the satellite, not just the climatic conditions, but also digital maps, reports of the agriculture produce and how much it is growing, right? And you would be able to quantify this overall supply statistic, right, within the region. So if I'm a farmer who's kind of coming in late, I should be able to, in some period of time, be able to predict that I'm actually killing the market by producing excess of the same good or not, right? So what choice of produce should I go after is also significantly being enhanced by the space monitoring. Apart from the fact that how can I prevent myself from locust attacks to others, right? So, and we in India have seen significant locust attacks this year. And if only we could use or rely more on spatial monitoring, which we did towards the end, but to start predicting and taking preventive causes, right? So that's how it's being used. But coming to the third and the most interesting aspect, for which I've kind of given the entire slide, is, and we've also kind of helped one of our clients to kind of help them in that, is the food traceability management, right? What does it mean? Well, recently, over the past few decades, I think there has been awareness slash a fad in terms of going organic. But what we also realize is, under the name or the garb of organic, there are times that various different farmers end up fleecing the consumers, and therefore, a food traceability management actually helps us track it back to the farm, right? When was this produce truly harvested, right? What did this harvest actually go through? Did it have any any bad kind of scenarios that it went through? Did it go through pesticides, etc.? How can I track that? And it's not just in the agri produce, but also in the animal husbandry, right? So how was this pig or the cow? What was the life cycle of this cow? Which farm did it come from? Was that cow actually, did it go through atrocities during the period of its lifetime before coming to in front of us in our plate, right? And it is the farm to fork activity of blockchain and significant blockchain applications which are happening, right? So like we look at the pricing and the date of manufacture and date of expiry today, I think very, very soon it will be applicable all across, that we'll be able to use blockchain and be able to tag the various applications of the food produce that we are having to ensure that they are authentic and genuine. Uh, one of our friends or customers is actually planning to implement that in their produce of shrimps, trying to see how can I ensure that the moment that the shrimp is extracted or taken out from the sea or the deep seas, how can it go to the consumer directly? And these consumers could be spread globally across, right? So how can we avoid the lifespan of shrimp from the time it is taken out from the sea to the time it is served to you on the plate? How can we shrink that time and ensure that we are aware of what is the time taken for it to actually reach there, and keep optimizing that, right? Because the fresher the produce, the better the produce, the less atrocity the produce has gone through, the less pesticides and other you know um, external things it has gone through, the better it is, right? Starbucks and Microsoft have partnered to do something fairly similar in terms of how do they ensure that the organic produce that Starbucks is serving in terms of the Colombian coffee is as fresh and as true, um, when it's served to us on a coffee mug, right? So various different applications which are happening there. And then with that, I'll just kind of go ahead into some of the supply chain kind of related and logistics related applications. Now that is again very interesting, right? Primarily because supply chain and logistics, as I said, is some of the easiest. That the amount of losses which are happening is significantly higher. It is the first thing where technology is disrupting, right? Whether it is from demand prediction and therefore ensuring that the demand and the supply is better mapped and matched, whether it is moving away from a supply driven and then you generate the demand, right? So the traditional models of agriculture is you produce a supply, you ensure there is supply, you go to the market, to the mandi or the market where the wholesale of the product is there, and then the buyers try and figure out, oh, what is being produced and what is the price for each of the things, and try to determine the demand at that point in time. If in case we reverse that and predict the demand upfront, and then ensure that the farmer actually harvests those things, that actually enhances both the quality of the produce and the freshness with which it can be served, right? We are seeing these kind of applications ourselves, and we are actually working with one of the Fortune 500 companies to figure out how to optimize and shrink this time, as it comes to you, as it is delivered to the consumers, right? Similarly, one of the early stage companies or a unicorn organization in New York is trying to do that for aggregating the demand for all the restaurants in the northeast part of the US, especially the New York and other areas, to kind of do it, right? The second set of examples are definitely, the supply chain innovators. And one of the examples I would take is kind of Ninja Cart, which has been able to do it at much larger scale to organize the demand and make it far more structured in India. And they are now actually aggregating a huge amount of demand across 20,000 farmers, and therefore predict and bring more science around prediction of the demand, and ensuring the warehouse management is far more efficient than ever before. Right? The third aspect, which I will not talk much about, but what we are seeing is, consumers are becoming far more conscious, and therefore, how do you do indoor farming or urban farming much more? So whether it's the small houses or the apartments that individuals have, and there are many more new age companies which are coming up to ensure that, especially the food produced, which is highly perishable, how can consumers actually grow it, with a fair bit of efficiency within their premises, so that the time of harvest to the time of cooking is literally shrunk to minuscule, right? And the consumers can enjoy the freshness there, right? So some of these kind of applications and fairly interesting that we see here as well. Coming to the third aspect, which is automation and robotics, and with the introduction of IoT devices, and the fact that AI as well, right? So both AI as well as IoT is making a lot of changes into truly making farming mechanized way more, right? So while farming processing was earlier mechanized around 40, 50 years back, but I think what is happening now is the process of farming is getting mechanized, right? Whether it's the use of drones, whether it's the use of automated tractors, and there are several examples, whether it's the rabbit tractors, which has autonomous tractors to ensure that the labor challenges are not there, and you get a higher yield. But also in the domestic scenario in India, what we see is a lot of tractor manufacturers trying to figure out how can we better partner with the farmer by providing them some intelligence in terms of the acidity levels within their soil, to what are the climatic conditions and prediction of the, prediction of the climatic conditions and the weather forecasting over a period of time, so that they can better manage it. Clearly, as mechanization of the farming is happening, other parts of the process of farming, whether it's seeding, weeding, and there are some companies that both we are discussing with, as well as we've seen, are automating these aspects, right? And it's as I said, not limited to one aspect of the farming, but kind of there in across the chain of farming. Agrobots, again, a very interesting example of how harvest automation is happening to ensure that the harvesting of the strawberries, harvesting of the apples is far more mechanized, such that they are not impacted or perished during the process of harvesting, and it can be done much faster and better, than ever before, right? So literally, especially in higher value products, and also for the grape vining and smart irrigation processes have been there, but a far more amount of automation in all the vineyards has already happened. But higher produce yields, wherever that is applicable, we are seeing these applications kind of already being present there, right? And with that, I'll kind of proceed to the next phase, which is agricultural processing and packaging, and the various different scenarios that we see there. Clearly, I think some of the aspects that we see here is plant-based alternatives for more innovation. These may not be pure tech solutions, but how can you replace meat with cultivation of meat, right? Bill Gates has been talked so many, we've heard Bill Gates talk so many times about trying to replace or grow the burger in the, in the farm, rather than have the, bovine go through that process, especially hampering the Amazon forests, right? So we've kind of seen a lot of more processing, which is biochemical related, and as well as packaging related, such that we minimize the use of preservatives. It is much more healthier for the body. And from a packaging innovation, I think it's more fundamental, where more organic ways of packaging and more organic ways of using preservatives are being invented or researched, so that the packaging process and the lifespan of the produce is significantly more increased, right? So these have been some of the examples that we've kind of gone through, and with that I'll quickly come through the conclusions before we open up for further rounds of discussions. Right, to conclude, I think I'll keep it very simple. Clearly we have been witnessing a lot of changes in the technology adoption globally, in terms of the agricultural produce, and according to me, it's the fourth wave of transformation, right? It is not a one-step change. It is going to be a significant, drastic change. I believe that the smaller farmers are going to be far more impacted as vis-a-vis the larger organizations or enterprises. And I think, therefore, all of us, need to be prepared for it, and be ready for the newer business models which are going to come. One of the things that I did not talk about as much is, as a service models, right? Whether it's tractor as a service, or harvesting as a service, or entire chain of farming as a service, right? So farming as a service in various different forms and fashions has become significantly more important, and for countries which are more developing, this has become far more relevant, because the size of farms are small, the economies of scale exists, and therefore various different organizations are thinking, how do we implement farming as a service significantly more, especially, as I say, that agriculture and farming is becoming a mechanized, way too mechanized than ever before. So that's a little bit about what we've been seeing in the agri space, both across our customers as well as some of the generic trends. I'm happy to take questions or talk about some of the experiences that we at HashedIn have gone through, but that's just a brief. So I'll take a pause, and if there is anything, happy to address.
So, Harshit, we have a couple of questions. The first one is from Parth. His question is, how can Agri-Tech companies enable small farmers to basically increase their yield and educate them, keeping in mind the financial issues that they face, right? So it's all well and good to talk about these technologies, right? But I believe that, you know, the finance and the know-how may be barriers to them adopting such technologies. So how can that be, addressed by Agri-Tech companies?
Sure.
And how can HashedIn
I think most of the things and as a service models are essentially there primarily so that they reduce the capex of the customers, right? Most of these business models which are coming up in a as a service model, right? So it does not necessitate that the farmer will have to pay upfront a huge amount of capex, and hopefully each of these things are able to enhance or provide the ROI in most of the scenarios upfront, right? Now the question becomes, are all these technologies that we are talking about mature enough that there is an aggregator which is ready to provide that SaaS model service? That becomes a big question mark. The second question mark is the ROI actually there yet that it will be adopted in various different scenarios for the small farmers? And the answer may not be true today, and which is why I'm saying this is the decade for transformation for agriculture. And I see that some of these models will be there for the small farmers in a very, very short span of time, in less than 3 to 5 years.
The next question is from Govinda. His question is, given the fact that the agri sector is largely dependent upon government subsidies and interventions, and the population involved in agri is mostly illiterate. So do you feel that we're just scratching the surface in terms of these tech interventions that you spoke about, or do you really think the agri sector will be transformed by technology in the next decade?
So let me address this question in two different parts, right? The first aspect you said is, whether this will have an impact. For sure, it's going to have an impact. Is it going to have an impact on the developed countries upfront, or far more, or far before that than it impacts the developing countries? For sure, it is going to do that. But let's come. I think your question is more attuned towards developing countries, where inherently the farmers may not be able to use a lot of these things upfront, and are still dependent to a certain extent on the idiosyncrasies of the rain god or the government or things like that, right? And I think fundamentally, these are capex intensive areas. They are SaaS enabled. I think in some form or fashion, whether the larger enterprises kind of coming in and kind of disrupting the markets for themselves, and therefore marginalizing the smaller farmers, or the fact that the government provides certain assets like these as a service kind of a model, such that these things need to be adopted. But fact of the matter will be that this is going to disrupt and enhance the productivity of various different facets of agriculture, both in terms of productivity enhancement as well as produce enhancements, right? So the amount of labor which is required will be reduced, and the amount of produce which is coming out should be increasing. And both the aspects it will impact as you adopt better scientific and better adopted tools. Um, a lot of these RFIDs and others are so dirt cheap right now that they are being adopted within the farm sector, right? A lot of things, Internet of Cows, I think, is being adopted way more than you and I think. So yes, it will.
Okay, great. So the next question is from Sarvanan. So his question is divided into three parts. The first part is AgriTech focuses on high productivity, but how does it ensure that quality food is produced? He's mentioned that we can take the example of USA, where agriculture is done primarily for productivity. So that's the first part of his question. The second part is what value does this industry bring to the farmer slash producer and the consumer? And the third question is how does Agri-Tech plan to enter rural villages, which has a lot of potential, but is somewhat impenetrable due to poor internet connectivity?
Okay. So let's take the each of the questions separately. I think the first part of the question is Agri-Tech and the quality of food. I think technology is definitely there or being utilized to enhance the productivity or the quality of produce, right? It is there to shrink the time that the food actually comes to your table in various different forms of fashion. So how will it help? It will help in minimizing the wastes. I think that is what the fundamental or the first aspect that we are seeing far more in India, right? So if you are talking about more in the Indian scenario, how can we minimize and reduce the wastage is the first and foremost kind of aspect of enhancing the productivity of the agricultural produce. But having said that, right, not all across the world is labor as easily available, and even in India, labor is getting increasingly more difficult, at least the quality and the quantity of labor as and when you need it. And I think clearly Agri-Tech helps you kind of enhance that way more, far more. And therefore, kind of helping the overall ecosystem. In terms of it being able to penetrate the rural villages and the internet issue, I think it will penetrate the rural villages. I think some of the technologies, and I think a large part of the automation that we were talking about, some basic part of the automation might come up, and a larger part of the automation might take time. But internet issues, I think India's internet penetration in the rural areas, I think if you see the graph, the internet adoption and the consumption is growing up by a growth rate of more than 100%. So I think it's just a matter of time, and within a few years that will be resolved. So I don't consider internet to be a significant challenge, 5 years, 10 years down the line, especially what we are seeing in the telecom market. But overall, I think if you see more of the global scenario, I think you'll start appreciating the fact that automation will be significantly more enhancing the quality and the overall amount, degree of produce. In India, I think it will start with more amount of reducing the wastage at different stages and bringing the produce from the rural interiors to the table of the urban consumers way faster than it ever has been, right? So, getting those fresh Shimla apples in a much shorter span of time is something that will be a luxury for us very shortly.
Right, great. So the next question is from Gaurav. So his question is, in the context of India, so Reliance is coming up with big plans for farm to fork and filling some of the supply chain gaps that are there. What are your views on this strategy to, is it going to be just to kill the competition or plus startups, or in any way help it expand the overall market itself?
Okay. So will the competition be impacted? For sure? The competition is going to be impacted with the larger enterprise organizations coming in. I think in India, we still have a fair bit of leeway or room in terms of the consumption levels, as well as the amount of food produced and exports that India has been doing is fairly minuscule, right? And India has been fairly rich in terms of various different types of agricultural produce, whether it's in terms of fruits, in terms of grains and others, right? So the potential for exports and the kind of volume that India has is immense, given the labor advantages that we have. Now the question becomes, so the market is going to expand. To answer your question in short, we are seeing Indian organizations like KRBL and others who are exporting grains, and their exports kind of going up significantly over a period of time, right? So the branding of the wheat and flour and others is going up much more. The adoption and the love for the Indian fruits, etc., is going up globally, right? So on one hand, will it expand the market? To a certain extent, yes. But to the second part of the question is also the fact that, as I mentioned, the segments or sub-segments that is going to come in within the fruits varieties is going to be way higher than we have today, right? The gradations of food is going to be way higher than we have today. And therefore, it becomes very important for us to ensure traceability, and therefore pockets and pockets of opportunity for niche players will definitely emerge, such that they can compete with the big majors who are going to go after the mass market to start with.
Right. So the question we have is from Navneet. His question is how do we encourage farmers to own up farming, or educate them to realize the potential that it has, given all the disruptive changes that we're seeing in the industry?
How do we encourage bigger farmers to own up farming?
Yeah.
I think to a certain extent that change is coming into being, right? So if you are, and I'm assuming this is again in the context of India. So in India, I think real estate as a segment has disrupted or weighed away a large part of the farmers in terms of letting go of their land, as well as alternate mechanisms of urbanization. So I will say urbanization as a whole actually impacted adoption of farming far more. But the value of the farm produce and the reliability of the farm produce, I think definitely has been going up. If you see the agri-produce productivity and the increase of CAGR levels of agri-produce that is happening in India all across, it has been growing at in quantity, not the value overall, but in quantity has been growing up more than 10% year on year, right? So on an overall basis as well, farming as a segment is growing up at 5-6%, and we do see a fair bit of remuneration which is coming up, especially for people who have large parcels of land and that produce being available. I think the earlier bigger challenges were that the farmers could only produce in the local milieu, or could sell only to the nearest town or the village which was there. I think those kind of constraints have gone away, right? The logistics industry has gone through such a huge amount of revolution in the past 3-4 years, and if you see the organizations like Rivigo, like Blackbuck, who've reduced the time taken for a farm produce which is coming from Delhi to Bangalore, as an example, earlier what used to take 10 to 15 days now takes 2 to 3 days in a truck, right? Now, the moment you shrink the period by such a drastic amount, the productivity of the farmer, the productivity and the possibility or the farm produce actually coming down south and the market expanding is humongous, right? So a larger farmer and farmers all across India, I think, have to realize that. But fundamentally, the economics will grow only significantly unless they go into niche or boutique segments.
Right. So the next question is from Suresh. His question is, today with a lot of farmers, children moving to cities and taking up jobs, there are a lot of farmlands that are not cultivated, or you can say the cultivation is reduced. So how can technology help here and bring back farming to the fore?
Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, if there is no intent of the farmland owner to take up farming, I think technology can play a very limited or minuscule role. So I think as I said, you have to take the view of technology adoption in terms of reducing wastage as well as increasing productivity. Having said that, in order to achieve that, there is a capital expense which will be involved, right? Now, if the fundamental economics, and this is a segment which is evolving, right? Now, for a farmer who owns a farmland through generations and is not interested in farmlands, I think that equation will take time to take up. But as I also said, a lot of new models of SaaS are coming up, which is you lend a farm. A lot of models near the cities, where urban people for the better control of their own produce, they want to have own or have access to agricultural land and produce their own stuff there, right? There are so many models even here in India that you see that people are renting out as small as 500 square feet of land, and for the urban household who lives in an apartment to actually grow their own vegetable and get fun out of it, right? So there are a lot of different SaaS models, contract farming, to actually lending the land, to long-term leases, etc., which are kind of coming up. And in case the farmer is not interested and is located near to an urban location, can use some of these business models to kind of use and adopt, and others. But there are some constraints, and technology is not a mantra to solve all the problems.
Right. So the next question is from Siddharth. His question is, in India, how could the industry manage social repercussions of automating agriculture, given the possibility of work getting replaced and limited capabilities of reskilling or upskilling of the farming population? Could this be a major barrier to adoption?
To a certain extent, yes. I think India will be a laggard in terms of adoption of technology due to some of these reasons. Agriculture, as I mentioned upfront, employs nearly 58% of the Indian population, and Indian population is huge. So it is going to be a deterrent to a certain extent. And, but having said that, all these automation, what we have seen typically brings in new kinds of jobs. So what this is going to do is bringing in more kind of technology jobs, and Indians who can make an impact not just in India for agricultural produce, but also globally, right? And we are doing that. I've given you some examples of the accounts where, of projects and others where we are enabling and supporting transformation or technology adoption in the US as well. So will the quality of labor or improve, or the average productivity of the labor improve? For sure. Will that mean a lesser number of jobs? Yes, it will. Will it create some other jobs? Yes, it will. But if the farmer or the farmers are not ready to reskill themselves or go up the value chain, it is going to be difficult. Yes.
Right. So we have a last question from Govinda. So this is more from an investor's perspective. So if you were an investor and you had significant amounts of money to invest, why would you choose AgriTech over some other sector? What are what would be some of the reasons why you would choose that sector over any other sector?
Okay, I'll leave my investment philosophy away from the question, but kind of come to the crux of the question, which is why should VCs invest in agri-tech? And I think, fundamentally, I think the volume of the problem is so humongous, right? Repeatability of the problem is so humongous. Is this going to be disruptive? For sure, yes. So for a VC who's coming in, in these models, I think, it's a new market which poses a huge amount of potential opportunity. I think it provides a fairly compelling case, a fairly compelling business case to invest and kind of see how best that this can grow. So I think there is a strong business case for investors to come here. And one of the things that I said upfront initially was this is exactly the trend that we are seeing. We are seeing the fact that 80% is the increase in the annual investments which AgTech is kind of attracting. So we are seeing this trend for sure.
Right. So, okay, we have another question. This is from Shell. So his question is, how can technology help in managing finances for farmers? In the sense, getting better prices than MSP, issuance of short-term loans and its repayment. So how does technology help in that aspect?
I believe that could be a leading question. Thank you. So we are doing a lot of those kind of areas, right? So we are seeing some of the larger companies, both in India and across, coming into the space. In the space, in terms of developing a marketplace, I think there are way too many examples that I can give. I can give some examples that we've been personally involved in the US, in Europe, and in India, where we are trying to see how can we aggregate the demand online and ensure that we provide it to the nearest farmer, and ensure that reverse auction happens even before the harvest, right? So that the freshness of the food is maintained and it's brought to the consumer as soon as possible. While a lot of these basic fundamental parts of commercial transaction actually takes separately and before and outside of the supply chain issues, right? So we are seeing that, whether it's in the US with some of the examples that I mentioned about restaurants in the northeast of US, which are being adopted and kind of ordering in, some of the Fortune 500 companies that we are working in the US with to ensure fresh food as soon as possible at their set of restaurants. Some of the examples within shrimps and how can the shrimp trading be brought online and separate from the supply chain and the physical movement of the shrimps. To again, several such examples in India, right? So, I would say personally we can quote some 8-10 such examples. But coming to the second part of the question, which I think is fundamentally more interesting, which is with regards to what is the support that the farmers can get and what we have been involved in. And I'll give you some of the examples that we've been involved in, right? So some of the larger enterprises in India are providing rural microfinance loans to the farmers, and it is directly linked to the to specific farmers. It is directly linked to the phase of the life cycle that they are in the farming, because there is only one phase of the farming cycle that you need more money, right? One or two phases. And how do you manage their finances much better? So for sure, I think with some of the microfinance companies that we are working with, we are trying to address some of these kind of situations. And not just that, as a value adder, when I talked about the concept of farming as a service, it is about providing holistic education to the farmer. It is about providing the holistic knowledge to the farmer in terms of the soil conditions, weather conditions, and others, and predictions, as well as in terms of providing support in terms of equipments or implements for their farming practice, as well as a large part of the automation and finances, right? So we are seeing that. We personally are involved in, I can count four different examples with some of the larger BSE 100 companies in India, where we've been involved in such scenarios.
Great. So I think we're done with the questions, Harshit.
Okay. Good. It was great interacting, and happy to address if there are any other further questions. Thanks.